3 words changed Ethan Cole's life forever. He is finished. The sentence came from Victoria Kane, the most feared CEO in the logistics industry, during a closed boardroom meeting high above Manhattan, while rain hammered against the glass windows like bullets. No one argued with her. No one even looked surprised. Months earlier, Ethan had been the brilliant operations mastermind behind Kane Dynamics' explosive success, the man who solved impossible supply chain disasters overnight and saved million-dollar contracts before sunrise. But after a brutal restructuring, he was discarded like yesterday's trash, blacklisted from the industry he helped build, abandoned by colleagues who once called him family, and left drowning in debt while raising his 8-year-old daughter alone. Every interview ended the same way: forced smiles, empty promises, rejection emails arriving before he even made it home. His car was repossessed. His bank account was nearly empty. And on the worst night of all, Ethan stood outside his apartment door listening to his daughter Lily softly ask from inside, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" He couldn't answer her, because for the first time in his life, he truly didn't know. Then came the decision that made everyone believe he had finally lost his mind. At the edge of an abandoned industrial district sat a ruined warehouse covered in rust-broken windows, flood damage, and decades of decay. Investors called it worthless. The city planned to demolish it within a year. Even the rats seemed to have abandoned the place. But Ethan saw something nobody else could see. Beneath the destruction, beneath the dust and silence, he saw the future. With the last of his savings money that should have paid rent, food, and school bills, he bought the warehouse outright. The entire industry laughed. Victoria Kane laughed the hardest. She called it the desperate fantasy of a broken man who refused to accept reality. But while billion-dollar executives mocked him from skyscrapers, Ethan worked through freezing nights repairing walls with his bare hands while Lily slept under a winter coat in the corner of the warehouse office. And slowly, impossibly, the ruins began to transform. What started as one man's final gamble soon became the greatest threat Kane Dynamics had ever faced, because the single dad everyone buried was about to rise from the ashes and become the rival that could destroy an empire. The rain had not stopped in 3 days, and the cold gray water sliding down the apartment windows made Ethan Cole's life feel even darker than it already was. The tiny apartment smelled faintly of instant noodles and old heater dust, and every few minutes the broken radiator rattled loudly before falling silent again. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at a laptop screen filled with unpaid bills, rejection emails, and warnings from the bank. The blue glow from the monitor reflected in his tired eyes, while his fingers pressed against his forehead as if he could physically stop the pressure building inside his mind. Another email arrived. "We appreciate your interest, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate." Ethan read the sentence twice before closing his eyes. The wording changed every time, but the meaning stayed exactly the same. Nobody wanted him anymore. 8 months earlier, Ethan had been one of the most respected logistics strategists in New York. Executives used to wait outside conference rooms for his approval. Investors listened when he spoke. He had built entire distribution systems that transformed Kane Dynamics into one of the most powerful logistics companies in the country. People once called him a genius. But now, after one brutal corporate restructuring and one cold conversation with CEO Victoria Kane, he had become untouchable. "It's simply business, Ethan." Those had been Victoria's exact words during the termination meeting. Calm, emotionless, final. Ethan still remembered the way nobody around the boardroom table looked him in the eyes while security waited outside the door like he was some kind of threat. At first he thought he would recover quickly. Men with his experience didn't stay unemployed for long. At least that was what he believed. Then the silence began. Recruiters stopped calling. Interviews suddenly disappeared. Promising meetings ended with awkward handshakes and polite lies. One executive finally admitted the truth during a networking event after too many drinks. You're talented, Ethan, the man whispered carefully while glancing around the room, but nobody wants to go against Victoria Kane. That sentence followed Ethan everywhere after that night. Nobody wants to go against Victoria Kane. Suddenly, his unemployment stopped feeling temporary. It felt planned, calculated, permanent. Across the apartment, 8-year-old Lily sat on the floor wearing oversized pajamas while coloring quietly in an old sketchbook. Ethan looked at her small figure and felt guilt tighten in his chest again. She was too young to fully understand what was happening. But children always sensed fear hiding behind fake smiles. "Dad," she asked softly without looking up from her drawing, "can we still go to the Science Museum this weekend?" Ethan forced an immediate smile onto his face, even though exhaustion was crushing him from the inside. "Of course," he answered. "I just need to finish some work first." Lily smiled happily and returned to coloring. Ethan's smile vanished the second she looked away. There was no work. There hadn't been work for months. The next morning, while Ethan scrambled eggs in the kitchen, his phone rang with an unknown number. Something inside him instantly tightened. "Mr. Cole?" a cold voice asked after he answered. "Yes. This is First National Auto Finance. Your vehicle repossession order has been approved." Ethan stopped moving. "There has to be some mistake. You are currently 92 days behind on payments, sir. I just need another week." "I'm sorry. The recovery team has already been dispatched." The line disconnected before Ethan could say anything else. Minutes later, he stood frozen beside the apartment window while 2 men attached his truck to a tow vehicle outside in the rain. Lily walked over quietly and stood beside him. "Why are they taking the truck?" she asked innocently. Ethan swallowed hard before answering. "Just fixing something." Lily nodded slowly, pretending to believe him because children sometimes protect their parents more than adults realize. That night, things became worse. A knock sounded at the apartment door just after Lily fell asleep on the couch beside her school books. Ethan already knew who it was before opening the door. The landlord stood in the hallway holding an envelope with tired sympathy written across his face. "Ethan, I've tried to help," he said quietly. "But the building owner is pressuring me." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I know. You're 2 months behind." "I know." The landlord hesitated before handing him the notice. "You have 10 days. 10 days." After the door closed, Ethan stood motionless in the dark apartment while the weight of those words crushed him from the inside. 10 days until eviction. 10 days until Lily lost the only home she still recognized as safe, for the first time in years. Fear truly entered Ethan's heart. Not fear for himself, fear for his daughter. The next several days became a blur of desperation. Ethan attended interviews wearing the same worn suit because he could no longer afford dry cleaning. He skipped meals so Lily could eat properly. He spent entire nights searching job boards while anxiety tightened around his chest like a chain. Every conversation ended the same way: forced smiles, empty promises, rejection. One afternoon after another failed interview, Ethan sat across from a young recruiter inside a crowded coffee shop while she awkwardly avoided eye contact. "You're overqualified," she said gently. Ethan stared at her in silence for several seconds. "That's not the reason." The woman hesitated before lowering her voice. "Mr. Cole, off the record, your name scares people." Ethan felt something inside him break quietly at those words. By the time he walked home through the rain that evening, exhaustion had reached deep into his bones. Halfway up the apartment stairs, he suddenly heard laughter from another family somewhere down the hallway. The sound reminded him of Lily, and for one terrifying moment, he realized how close he truly was to losing everything. That night, unable to breathe beneath the pressure anymore, Ethan borrowed an old car from a friend and drove aimlessly through the industrial district near the river. The deeper he traveled into the abandoned manufacturing zone, the emptier the streets became. Rusted factories stood beneath flickering streetlights like dead monuments to forgotten businesses. Most companies had abandoned the area years ago after the shipping industry collapsed there. Or at least that was what everybody believed. Ethan slowed the car when he passed a giant abandoned warehouse hidden behind broken fencing and overgrown weeds. Half the windows were shattered. Rainwater stained the concrete walls. A foreclosure sign leaned sideways near the entrance. Something about the building caught his attention immediately. He parked the car and stepped into the rain. Most people would have seen nothing except decay, but Ethan's eyes moved differently. He studied the roads surrounding the property, the nearby railway access, the river shipping lane less than a mile away. Then his expression slowly changed, because suddenly he understood something nobody else had noticed yet. 2 weeks earlier, the state government had quietly approved a massive cargo rail expansion project connecting the port directly to inland distribution routes. Almost nobody cared because the project would take years to complete. But Ethan had spent his entire career learning how to see the future of logistics before anyone else recognized it. And this warehouse sat directly in the center of where that future would grow. His pulse quickened. For the first time in months, his mind felt alive again. He walked along the fence line in the pouring rain while calculations formed rapidly inside his head. Investors saw a condemned property. Ethan saw positioning, scale, access, potential. If redesigned properly, the warehouse could become one of the most efficient distribution hubs in the region once the new rail system opened. The idea sounded insane even to him. He barely had enough money left to survive another month. Yet he returned the next morning with Lily before school. She stared up at the giant abandoned building nervously. "This place looks scary," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe. Why are we here?" He crouched beside her and pointed toward the warehouse. "Tell me something. When everybody thinks something is worthless, does that always mean they're right?" Lily studied the building carefully before shaking her head. "No. Why not?" "Because sometimes people stop looking too early." Ethan stared at her for a moment before quietly laughing. Over the next few days, he researched non-stop. City development plans, railroad proposals, port expansion maps, property taxes, environmental reports. Every detail confirmed the same thing. The district was not dying, it was about to be reborn. But buying the warehouse would require every remaining dollar he had. If he failed, Lily would lose everything. If he succeeded. Ethan forced himself not to think that far ahead. One evening, he met his former colleague Marcus Reed inside a small downtown bar and explained the idea. Marcus nearly dropped his drink. "You're serious?" Ethan nodded. "That warehouse is a corpse." "No," Ethan replied quietly. "It's a gateway." Marcus stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You're behind on rent. Your car got repossessed. You don't even have stable income. What the hell are you thinking?" Ethan looked down silently before answering. "I'm thinking about survival. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was madness. Or maybe it was the first real opportunity he had seen since losing everything." A week later, Ethan sat inside a small bank office, signing paperwork with trembling hands, while the loan officer reviewed him with open skepticism. "This is highly irregular," she admitted. "You want to purchase condemned industrial property with no active business operations." Ethan nodded calmly. "Yes, your credit is declining. You have no employment, minimal liquidity. Why would you do this?" Ethan remained silent for several seconds before finally giving the only honest answer he had left. "Because if I keep waiting for someone to save me, my daughter is going to watch me lose everything." The room fell quiet after that. 3 days later, against all logic and probability, the purchase was approved. Ethan Cole used the last of his savings to buy the abandoned warehouse. The industry reacted immediately with disbelief and mockery. Some called it the final breakdown of a desperate man. Others laughed openly at what they described as a dying father's fantasy. high above Manhattan, inside the glass tower of Kane Dynamics. Victoria Kane listened to one of her executives explain the news while reviewing quarterly reports. He bought a condemned warehouse near the river, the man said with amusement. Victoria slowly looked up. For what? Nobody knows. She stared out at the skyline for a moment before speaking coldly. People do irrational things when they realize they've lost. Then she returned to work without another thought. But later that same night, while cold wind echoed through the empty warehouse and rainwater dripped from the damaged ceiling, Ethan stood silently in the middle of the darkness beside Lily, who held a flashlight tightly in both hands. Broken machinery covered the floors. Rust stained the walls. Entire sections looked ready to collapse. Most people would have turned around immediately. Lily looked up at him nervously. Dad? Yeah. Are we really doing this? Ethan stared at the ruined warehouse for several long seconds. Fear still existed inside him. So did uncertainty. But beneath both of them, something else had finally returned after months of pain and humiliation. Hope. Ethan squeezed Lily's hand gently and looked out across the darkness of the building that everyone else had already given up on. Yeah, he whispered softly. We are. The first month inside the warehouse nearly destroyed Ethan Cole physically. Every morning before sunrise, he drove through freezing industrial streets with Lily asleep in the passenger seat beneath old blankets, while the borrowed car heater barely worked. The warehouse still smelled like rust mold and rainwater, and every corner of the building seemed to remind him how impossible his situation truly was. Entire sections of the roof leaked during storms. Half the electrical system failed randomly. Rats scattered through the shadows whenever machinery moved. But while the rest of the city saw a dead building, Ethan saw something slowly beginning to breathe again. He spent every hour rebuilding the place with his own hands because he could not afford contractors. During the day, he cleaned debris, repaired broken loading docks, rewired damaged offices, and studied logistics software late into the night beside flickering lights powered by temporary generators. His hands became covered in cuts and grease stains. His back ached constantly. Some nights he fell asleep sitting upright against concrete walls while spreadsheets remained open on his laptop beside him. Yet despite the exhaustion crushing him every single day, something had changed inside him since buying the warehouse. For the first time since Victoria Kane destroyed his career, Ethan no longer woke up feeling powerless. He had something now. Small, fragile, risky, but his. Meanwhile, high above Manhattan, inside the polished glass headquarters of Kane Dynamics Victoria, Kane barely thought about Ethan anymore. In her mind, he was already finished. Another casualty of business. Another former executive who failed to survive outside the protection of a major corporation. Her focus remained fixed on expansion deals, shareholder meetings, and market dominance. Kane Dynamics was preparing to secure one of the largest distribution contracts in the country, and Victoria intended to eliminate every competitor standing in her path. Yet despite her confidence, Ethan's name continued appearing in small conversations around the industry. At first, it sounded almost laughable. Apparently, Ethan Cole is rebuilding some warehouse near the river. He's trying to launch a logistics startup. He thinks the industrial district is coming back. Most executives treated the rumors like entertainment. Some openly mocked him at conferences and private dinners. One article even referred to the warehouse as the graveyard gamble. Victoria herself smirked the first time she read it. He's desperate, she said calmly during a board meeting. Desperate people confuse movement with progress. The executives around the table nodded immediately. Nobody questioned her. Nobody ever did. But what Victoria failed to understand was that Ethan had stopped playing by the same rules that controlled everyone else in the industry. While billion-dollar corporations focused on massive accounts and quarterly earnings reports, Ethan quietly targeted the clients nobody cared about anymore. Small manufacturers, independent retailers, local distributors abandoned by larger logistics firms because they were considered too insignificant to matter. Ethan personally visited each business himself. He drove for hours across the state meeting exhausted business owners inside warehouses, family shops, and tiny offices struggling to survive beneath rising transportation costs. Most of them recognized him immediately. "You're Ethan Cole," one owner said during a meeting inside a furniture warehouse. "You used to run operations at Kane Dynamics." Ethan nodded. "I did. Why would someone like you work with a company our size?" Ethan looked around the struggling warehouse before answering quietly. "Because I know what it feels like when powerful people stop seeing your value." That answer changed everything. Slowly, customer by customer, Ethan began building trust where giant corporations had stopped paying attention. He created faster delivery systems for smaller businesses, more flexible schedules, lower operating waste. He personally answered calls at midnight when shipments got delayed. He worked beside drivers during emergencies. He fixed problems himself instead of hiding behind assistants and departments. And word spread faster than anyone expected. Within 4 months, the ruined warehouse no longer looked abandoned. Trucks started arriving daily. Offices filled with refurbished equipment. Damaged loading docks became operational again. The old building slowly transformed into a living system fueled almost entirely by Ethan's obsession with proving everyone wrong. Lily watched the changes happen one piece at a time. Some nights, she sat quietly in the office corner doing homework while Ethan and 2 part-time workers unloaded shipments together. Other nights, she helped label packages using oversized gloves while laughing at how serious her father became during inventory checks. Despite the hardship surrounding them, those moments slowly became the happiest she had seen him in years. But success always attracts attention. One rainy Tuesday morning, Victoria Kane entered the executive conference room carrying a fresh financial report. Halfway through reviewing regional numbers, her expression changed slightly. "What is this?" she asked coldly. The room immediately fell silent. One executive adjusted his glasses nervously. "We lost 3 mid-sized regional accounts last quarter." Victoria looked up slowly. "To who?" The executive hesitated. "A company called Riverline Logistics." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Victoria lowered the report carefully onto the table. "Riverline Logistics," she repeated. "That's Ethan Cole's company." Nobody answered. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the numbers again. The accounts themselves were small, almost meaningless compared to Kane Dynamics' scale. But that wasn't what bothered her. What bothered her was the pattern. Ethan wasn't randomly surviving anymore. He was growing, quietly, strategically, intentionally. Increase regional pricing pressure. Victoria ordered calmly. Offer temporary discounts to any client considering competitors. Even the smaller accounts, one executive asked carefully. Victoria looked directly at him. Especially the smaller accounts. Across the city, Ethan noticed the retaliation immediately. Clients began receiving aggressive offers from Kane Dynamics, reduced pricing, faster contracts, exclusive incentives. Several businesses called Ethan apologetically before canceling meetings. "We just can't compete with their rates." "I'm sorry, Ethan. They're offering terms we can't ignore." Marcus Reed slammed a folder onto Ethan's desk one evening inside the warehouse office. "She's targeting you." Ethan remained calm while reviewing shipment schedules. "I expected that. This isn't competition anymore. She's trying to suffocate us before we grow." Ethan leaned back silently. He understood Victoria too well to take the attacks personally. Victoria Kane never destroyed threats emotionally. She destroyed them efficiently. But Ethan also understood something else. Kane Dynamics had become so large that it no longer knew how to move quickly. The company was powerful but slow, controlled by layers of executives, shareholders, and bureaucracy. Ethan's operation, however, was still small enough to adapt instantly. So instead of fighting Victoria's discounts directly, Ethan changed strategy completely. He invested the company's remaining budget into technology. Most people assumed the warehouse only handled basic shipping operations, but behind the scenes, Ethan was building something much more dangerous. A custom AI-driven logistics system designed to predict shipping delays, optimize routes in real time, and reduce transportation waste faster than traditional corporate systems could react. It was risky, expensive, and if it failed, Riverline Logistics would collapse completely. Marcus thought Ethan had lost his mind again. "You barely have enough cash flow to survive another quarter," he argued. "And you want to spend money on experimental software?" Ethan stared at the warehouse floor map projected across his computer screens. "Kane Dynamics wins with scale," he said quietly. "We win with speed. And if you're wrong..." Ethan looked toward the warehouse floor where Lily sat eating dinner beside a stack of shipping containers while doing math homework. "Then we lose everything anyway." Months passed. The pressure intensified daily. Articles began appearing online comparing Riverline Logistics to Kane Dynamics. Some described Ethan as a bold underdog. Others called him reckless. Business podcasts debated whether he was a visionary or a desperate former executive chasing revenge. The attention irritated Victoria more than she admitted publicly. During one television interview, a reporter casually asked, "Do you view Ethan Cole as legitimate competition?" Victoria smiled politely for the cameras. Kane Dynamics doesn't concern itself with failed startups. But later that night, alone inside her penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, she replayed the interview clip twice, while reading another market analysis report mentioning Riverline Logistics. Her jaw tightened slightly, because the numbers no longer looked temporary. Ethan's company was growing faster than any regional competitor in the sector. Worse, clients consistently praised Riverline's reliability and customer response times. Victoria began hearing Ethan's name more frequently during investor calls. That smaller company near the river, their delivery efficiency is impressive. Who built their operational software? The questions annoyed her far more than they should have. Meanwhile, Ethan barely noticed the media attention because survival still consumed every second of his life. Even with growing business, Riverline remained financially fragile. One delayed payment could destroy payroll. One equipment failure could shut down operations. Ethan often stayed awake until dawn, reviewing expenses while stress hollowed out his face further each month. Yet despite the pressure, something powerful had begun happening inside the warehouse. People started believing in him again. Drivers who once worked for major corporations joined Riverline voluntarily because they respected how Ethan treated employees. Former warehouse staff returned after hearing rumors about the company's culture. Small business owners personally recommended Riverline to others because Ethan solved problems larger companies ignored. Loyalty slowly formed around him, not through fear like Victoria ruled with, but through trust. That difference became dangerous. One evening after a brutal 16-hour workday, Ethan stood alone on the warehouse roof watching trucks move below beneath glowing floodlights. The once abandoned property no longer looked dead. It looked alive. Marcus walked beside him carrying financial reports. "You should see this," he said quietly. Ethan reviewed the numbers under the rooftop lights. Revenue had nearly tripled in 6 months. New contracts continued arriving weekly. Regional market share remained small overall, but growth projections were exploding. Marcus shook his head slowly in disbelief. "Do you realize what's happening?" Ethan remained silent. Marcus looked directly at him. "She's scared now." Ethan said nothing for several seconds. Then he looked out across the city skyline where Kane Dynamics Tower stood glowing in the distance like a monument to power. "No," he answered quietly. "Not yet." But deep inside the executive tower of Kane Dynamics, Victoria Kane sat alone in the boardroom long after midnight reviewing another market report with growing frustration. The problem was no longer Ethan's survival. The problem was that he refused to disappear. Worse than that, he was evolving into something nobody expected, a competitor fueled not by greed, but by hunger. And Victoria knew from experience that hungry people were the most dangerous rivals of all. Success did not arrive in Ethan Cole's life like triumph. It arrived quietly hidden beneath exhaustion, unpaid stress, sleepless nights, and sacrifices nobody ever saw. While Riverline Logistics slowly became a growing name in the industry, the truth inside the warehouse remained painfully fragile. Most nights after the workers left and the trucks stopped moving, the giant building became silent again except for the hum of old fluorescent lights and the distant echo of machinery cooling down in the dark. That was when Ethan's second job began. He cleaned floors himself to save money, repaired damaged shelves, reviewed contracts until sunrise, calculated payroll numbers over and over with growing anxiety tightening in his chest. Because despite the company's growth, one bad month could still destroy everything. And through all of it, Lily remained beside him like the small light keeping him alive inside the darkness. On winter nights when snow pressed against the warehouse windows, Ethan would heat cups of instant noodles using an old electric kettle in the office corner while Lily sat wrapped in blankets drawing pictures beside him. Sometimes she laughed at how serious he looked while eating noodles like they were part of an important business meeting. "Dad," she once whispered with a grin, "when we become rich, are you still going to eat those?" Ethan smiled tiredly across the desk. "Probably." "Why?" "Because they remind me how hard we fought." Lily nodded like she completely understood, even though she was still too young to truly know how much her father was carrying alone. Ethan tried desperately to protect her from the worst parts of their reality, but children notice things adults think they hide well. She noticed when he skipped meals pretending he already ate earlier. She noticed when he stared silently at bills late at night after thinking she was asleep. She noticed the dark circles beneath his eyes growing deeper every month. One night after finishing homework inside the warehouse office, Lily quietly walked toward him while he sat reviewing financial reports beneath dim lights. Without saying anything, she placed half of her sandwich beside his laptop. Ethan looked up. "What's this?" Lily shrugged innocently. "I'm full." Ethan stared at the sandwich for several seconds, because they both knew she wasn't. That moment nearly broke him more than any business failure ever had. Later that same night, after Lily fell asleep on the office couch beneath an oversized hoodie, Ethan sat alone beside the warehouse window watching snow fall outside while emotions quietly overwhelmed him. There had been a time when his life looked completely different. Before the divorce, before losing his career, before becoming a man trying to build a future from ruins while pretending not to be terrified every single day. Sometimes the pressure became so heavy he could barely breathe beneath it. Yet every time he looked at Lily sleeping nearby, he forced himself to stand back up again, because quitting no longer belonged only to him. One freezing morning, Riverline's heating system failed completely during a storm. The warehouse temperature dropped fast enough for workers' breath to become visible indoors. Marcus argued that they should temporarily shut operations down, but Ethan refused because several shipments needed to reach small businesses depending on them before Christmas weekend. So instead, Ethan spent 16 straight hours helping workers move inventory manually through freezing conditions while Lily sat near portable heaters bundled in layers of winter clothes doing school assignments. By midnight, nearly everyone else had gone home except Ethan. His hands shook from exhaustion while he finished loading the final truck himself. When he finally returned to the office, Lily was still awake, waiting for him. "You should have slept," Ethan said softly. Lily shook her head. "I wanted to make sure you came back." Ethan smiled faintly before collapsing into the chair beside her. Lily studied him quietly for a moment. "Dad." "Yeah. Are you scared?" The question hit him harder than expected. Ethan looked down at his tired hands before answering honestly for once. "All the time." Lily frowned slightly. "Then why do you keep going?" Ethan stared at her in silence, because the real answer was standing right in front of him. Because some things matter more than being afraid. Lily thought about that carefully before smiling. Like me, Ethan felt his chest tighten instantly. He pulled her gently closer and kissed the top of her head. Exactly like you. Those small moments became the emotional heartbeat of Ethan's entire journey. The world outside the warehouse saw competition business growth and headlines about a rising company challenging Kane Dynamics. But inside the walls of Riverline Logistics, the truth was much simpler. A father was fighting to give his daughter a future where she never had to fear losing everything again. And Lily understood more than Ethan realized. One evening, she overheard two workers discussing how much pressure the company was under financially. That night, after Ethan finally fell asleep at his desk from exhaustion, Lily quietly opened her backpack and pulled out a small pink piggy bank covered in stickers. She stared at it for several seconds before placing it carefully beside his laptop. The next morning, Ethan discovered it waiting there with a handwritten note taped to the top. For the company. Don't quit, Dad. Ethan sat frozen in silence while holding the note in trembling hands. Inside the piggy bank were crumpled dollar bills, birthday money, and coins Lily had spent years saving for a bicycle she wanted. Ethan suddenly had to cover his face because tears finally broke through the walls he had been holding together for months. No investor had ever believed in him the way that little girl did. No executive board had ever trusted him with that kind of pure faith. Later that day, Ethan drove Lily home from school while the city lights blurred across the windshield through heavy rain. You didn't have to give me your savings, he said quietly. Lily looked out the window. You always help me when I'm scared. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. That's different. No, she answered softly. It's not. Those words stayed with him longer than any business victory ever could. As Riverline continued growing, Ethan became more respected throughout the industry, but success never changed the way he treated Lily or forgot what they survived together, even after the company could finally afford a small apartment closer to the warehouse. Ethan still worked late nights beside her while she did homework in the office because neither of them wanted to lose the closeness forged during those painful months. The warehouse had become more than a business. It had become proof that broken things could live again. One night, after a brutal week of media attacks and aggressive moves from Kane Dynamics, Ethan sat alone on the warehouse floor staring at financial reports with visible defeat in his eyes. The pressure from Victoria was becoming relentless. Larger clients were being threatened away. Competitors were spreading rumors about Riverline collapsing. Investors continued refusing to support the company because they feared Kane Dynamics' influence. For the first time in months, Ethan looked genuinely exhausted beyond recovery. Lily quietly walked over carrying 2 cups of instant noodles and sat beside him on the concrete floor. Neither of them spoke for a while. The warehouse lights glowed softly around them while snow fell outside the massive windows. Finally, Lily nudged 1 cup toward him. You always say noodles fix everything. Ethan laughed quietly despite himself. Did I really say that a lot? The smile faded from his face a few moments later. What if this isn't enough? He whispered without thinking. Lily looked at him carefully. What isn't all of this? Ethan gestured around the warehouse. What if I can't protect us? Lily stayed silent for several seconds before leaning her head gently against his shoulder. Dad, she whispered softly, you already did. And in that moment, sitting on a cold warehouse floor beside the daughter who had survived every failure with him, Ethan finally understood something Victoria Kane never would. Power was not the reason he kept fighting. Pride was not the reason. Revenge was not the reason. Love was. And love made people dangerous in ways the business world could never fully understand. The final battle between Riverline Logistics and Kane Dynamics did not end with screaming headlines or dramatic courtroom victories. It ended quietly, the way most meaningful things in life do. One winter morning, a catastrophic systems failure struck Kane Dynamics during the largest shipping week of the year. Hundreds of deliveries froze across multiple states. Warehouses shut down. Clients panicked. News channels immediately exploded with speculation that Victoria Kane's empire was collapsing under the pressure of rapid expansion and outdated infrastructure. Investors demanded answers. Executives blamed each other behind closed doors. For the first time in decades, Victoria sat alone in her office without certainty. And then something happened that nobody expected. Ethan Cole offered help. Marcus thought he was insane when he heard the decision. After everything she did to you, he asked in disbelief, you could bury Kane Dynamics right now. Ethan stood silently near the warehouse window, watching snow fall across the city before answering quietly. There are thousands of workers depending on that company. Drivers, families, people who had nothing to do with her choices. Within hours, Riverline's systems were temporarily integrated to stabilize delayed shipments across critical routes. The move shocked the entire industry. Reporters called it brilliant strategy. Others called it mercy. Victoria herself arrived at the warehouse late that night without security or executives beside her. For several long seconds, she simply stood inside the building she once mocked, staring at the workers moving confidently beneath warm lights and newly rebuilt steel beams. The ruined warehouse she once called a desperate mistake had become something extraordinary. Ethan found her standing near the loading docks in silence. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Victoria looked around slowly before saying, I thought losing everything would break you. Ethan glanced toward the office upstairs where Lily sat asleep on the couch beneath a blanket. It almost did. Victoria followed his eyes, and something inside her expression softened for the first time in years. But it didn't, she whispered. Ethan shook his head gently. No, because I wasn't fighting for myself anymore. Victoria said nothing after that. Maybe because deep down she understood the truth too late. Power could build companies, fear could control industries, but neither could replace love, purpose, or the quiet strength of having someone worth surviving for. Months later, Riverline Logistics officially became one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the country. The abandoned warehouse near the river transformed into a state-of-the-art distribution center known throughout the industry as one of the smartest business recoveries in modern history. Yet Ethan's favorite place inside the entire building remained the small rooftop overlooking the city skyline. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind Manhattan in soft gold light, Lily stood beside him holding a cup of hot chocolate while trucks moved steadily below like rivers of light through the darkness. Dad? She asked softly. Yeah. Did you always know this would happen? Ethan smiled quietly while looking out across the city that once buried him. No, he answered honestly. I just knew giving up wasn't an option. Then Lily slipped her hand into his, and for the first time in many years, Ethan Cole finally felt something stronger than survival. Peace. VidIQ.